So we're going to start with the lightning round. And you guys are seasoned pros by now, so I know you're going to do awesome at this. So you each have a yes card and a no card. And but you also have something that I bit from C.R. Douglas, who's awesome, which is if you have something you want to say other than yes or no, you each get one chance to wave your blue card. And then you can say whatever you got to say until I cut you off. All right. So, yes, no lightning round. Have you, some of these you may have answered before, so thank you to our previous forums who have suggested these questions, and you may have also addressed some of these things in your statements just now. Have you had a child in Seattle Public Schools, or do you have a child in Seattle Public Schools? All right. Do you support the Families and Education Levy on the fall ballot? Kate? Oh, would you like to say something else?
I would.
All right.
Yeah. I'm voting for the, I'm sorry. I am voting for the Families and Education Levy. I have been following the Families and Education Levy for the last few years. I went to all of the hearings at City Hall. I tried to participate in the meetings that they had for Families and Education Levy. They did not allow any public comment at those meetings. It was actually very hard to be involved. The levy has a terrible history of accomplishing pretty much nothing. However, I'm hopeful that they may be on the right track. Unfortunately, they're going to judge all of their progress with the MAP test, which is not what the MAP test was designed for. So this is my thought. I'm going to vote yes, but I'm going to watch them like a hawk.
Thank you.
And I'd like you to as well.
All right, thanks, Kate. Should all kids who qualify for Spectrum be guaranteed a seat in the program? And I'm sorry.
They were clapping. I couldn't hear the
Oh, sure, yeah. Should all kids who qualify for Spectrum be guaranteed a seat in the program? Spectrum is the gifted program for the kids who test in at the top 10%. All right, no blue cards. Okay, should schools be allowed to choose their own curricula? Thank you. All right, and the titters might be because we've seen a pattern here, I think. So we see the incumbents say no and the challengers say yes. All right. Should language immersion schools be option schools accessible to all students?
You're not allowed to look at each other.
Oh, you can. You can. That's all right. Okay, Peter, what would you like to say?
Yes.
You know, I think this is not a yes or no question, because I think you need to look at individual schools and their needs and the attendance needs for that particular school. So I'm not prepared to say yes or no in general. I would like to have an expansion of language immersion. There has been in the last 4 years. We've added, for example, Concord, additional programs in Ingram, Denny, and Beacon Hill. And so I want to move in that direction, whether they are neighborhood schools or whether they are option schools. I think we need to calibrate, because we want to make sure that we're providing the geographic layout of schools or where they are. We can't move physical buildings, of course, so therefore we want to be mindful about providing this, the attendance opportunities for neighborhoods.
Thank you, Steve.
I would just add to that I think mostly I'm interested in making it available to all kids on more of an option basis, but we have to make sure that where we have neighborhoods like we do near Concord down in South Park, where we have a native Spanish-speaking population that has to be served at their local school, that whatever scheme we come up with covers a population like that, as well as population that is willing and able to opt in.
Thank you. Should Ingram and Chief Sealth be accessible to all students? Should Ingram and Chief Sealth, with their IB programs, be accessible to all students? Gears turning. Does he use the blue card or not? Harriet.
Well, you know, I think it kind of dovetails on the immersion, the problem in terms of capacity to have IB in all of the places. I would like to see an expansion of the learning opportunities. And so I would kind of turn it around and say I would not want to open it up for everyone, because that gets us back into the transportation problems that we've had in the past, but maybe expand the IB program into more buildings like we are doing with Rainier Beach and a few others, so that it is accessible to people in the schools that they're already attending.
Thank you. All right. Do you support community organizations giving money to the district to help close the budget gap? Marty?
I'm just nervous about that. Of course, my basic belief is that communities should be embracing every school. At the same time, when community organizations step forward with money, I guess I would question, are these community organizations? If they are truly community organizations, I'm probably 100% for it. But if they're organizations that have strings that are attached from faraway places, then I would question it, because there are some agendas that are being pushed nationally, like the charter school movement, that I strongly disagree with.
Okay, thank you. Should teacher layoffs be based on teacher seniority? All right, Sherry.
Been dying for an opportunity to clarify my thinking on this, because sometimes it's hard to be clear with the cards. The first and most important thing is that we get some really good, robust teacher evaluation tools in place. No one's going to trust anything around a teacher RIF process that's based on a performance evaluation tool if teachers don't trust the tool. So I think it's imperative that we work that part of it first. I suspect that once there is a robust tool in place and teachers trust it and it's working and there's some track record with it, there'll be sort of a natural migration towards being willing to consider layoffs that are based on something other than seniority. So it's a little bit putting the cart before the horse to think you can just do a quick cutover to something other than seniority-based RIFs. I think you have to have the tool in place first, and you have to build the trust in the system.
Thank you. Michelle? Oh, Megan does, okay. All right.
Ditto.
Okay. All right, and so that, I'll not count that as your card, because I have the power to do that. Do you think teacher layoffs should be based on teacher performance, so it's the flip side of that?
Not map test performance, so.
Okay, and Sherry has used her blue card, so, and we've heard you, so thank you. Okay, should parent comments be considered in a teacher performance evaluation? I'm sorry, Margie. Oh, you did use your blue card. Yes, all right, but thank you. Maybe you'll find a way to crowbar it in later. Should Washington State consider charter schools? All right. Do you feel equity issues were resolved before the neighborhood schooling plan was implemented? No, all right, thank you. Okay, was there anyone who didn't use their blue card? I don't think so. You didn't use it. Was there anything you wanted to shove in there about any of those? Because that was our last lightning round question.
Is this on? Okay.
It is on.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the issue of schools choosing curricula. The problem with mandating curricula throughout the district is that some of the curricula are really bad, and particularly math. And so if a school decides that the math curricula is bad, which it is at all levels, I think they should have the right to adopt a better curriculum. However, I also don't believe that our district should be mandating bad math curriculum. I think that it is the district's obligation to improve math curriculum throughout the district so that the situation does not exist as it does today, which is that only the good schools, only the high-performing schools can get waivers and get their PTSAs to raise enough money to replace the district-mandated curriculum with something that works. And this is a very, very bad situation because the underperforming schools, where the achievement gap is the greatest, are mandated to use math curricula that discriminate against disadvantaged learners. And there is no way in the world we're going to put a dent in an achievement gap with these curricula.
So now we go to our 1 minute throwdowns. And so the way I'm going to run this is, in some cases I've been given instruction that the question has to go to a particular person, people, or category of candidate. And so in that case, if it has to go to a particular person, I will also give their opponent the opportunity to respond if they'd like to. Feel free to say, I'm good, if you feel you've already addressed it. And otherwise, you can just let me know when you want to say something about a particular question. If you don't have anything to say or you feel you've already addressed it, then don't feel like you have to answer it, because I want everyone to feel like they have a chance to collect their thoughts and want to address things that they want to address. So, first, I'll start with this one that has incumbents written on it. In light of the many failures of the current school board to adequately serve the Seattle School District, why do you think you can do a better job the second time around? And so the first incumbent who would like to say something on that, feel free. Steve?
Well, I think this is a job with an enormous learning curve. And I will say, as someone who came in with a fair amount of nonprofit board governance experience, that a board like this in a public setting is an order of magnitude, at least, bigger job than anything that I had experienced in terms of governance, not necessarily in terms of management. And so I would say that, first of all, I've worked my way through the learning curve, and clearly there have been mistakes and things that I wish that I could have done differently. But what we have done, I think, as a group now is having put in place a number of processes, particularly from an oversight perspective, where we may not have come into this job and may not have even realized we didn't have all the tools we needed to do good oversight. We've now got oversight work sessions, we've got a stronger internal audit function, a number of things that have made a huge difference, including having strengthened our board office to enable us to serve better independently of the administration.
This question is for incumbents. So any other incumbents like to address this? Sherry?
So largely, I would put a big check mark next to what I just heard Steve Sundquist say. I'd add a couple of thoughts. One, we came into a district that was in serious need of a lot of change. And when you undertake a lot of activities all at once, some you're going to do well, and others you're going to struggle with. And so I would say that given the volume of decisions, it doesn't necessarily surprise me. We didn't maybe get everything absolutely spot on. I would say that it's important not only that we implemented some of the governance changes that we talked about, but also to recognize that as you work through it, that you learn lessons and you incorporate change. So I think about the high school math adoption. To me, that was one of the biggest learning experiences. The process went down the road. The board didn't weigh in at the front end with guiding principles. Since that time, when we have big issues, we start with guiding principles so that staff knows directionally what the board is thinking and what the expectations are when they come back with solutions. So I think lessons learned is a big piece of it.
Thank you. Any other incumbents care to weigh in? Otherwise, I will move on. Oh, all right, Peter. No.
Steve and Sherry said it very well. So, next question.
Next question. Here we go. How do you plan, this is open to anyone, how do you plan to engage with community organizations like PTA and other parent or community groups? Michelle?
This feeds a bit into what I wanted to comment on last time. So something the board just did that made me drop my jaw as we talk about lessons learned, is they just decided that it is okay to introduce motions and then vote on them in the same meeting. And that puts a fine point on how important community involvement is at the end of the day to our incumbents. Another thing that we need to recognize is that we always bring up the PTA as a way to do community outreach. The PTA represents only a very small portion of the communities in our schools. As an alternative school parent, I know we have a site council. I'm extremely aware of the communities in the southeast and the southwest that do not attend public meetings. It's not within their culture to do these sorts of things. I'm aware of special education parents that feel left out of the system. I'm aware of any number of communities that would just like somebody to show up and ask them what they need. And that would be a great starting point for improved community engagement.
Thank you. And this one is for Sherry and Kate. What have you done with the state legislature to help fund and improve education?
That's not a question for me, so
Okay,
it's,
you pass.
well.
If there was something you
it's
wanted to
not-
say about the
it's
previous
not a
question.
comment. I would like to talk about the previous question.
Okay, that's fine.
So here's what I've learned. I'm in a mixed race family with a Mexican immigrant husband. I have talked to many families and students, and when we talk about engaging the community, here are my thoughts. We actually need to engage families directly, and they need to be engaged in the education of their own children first. There's a hierarchy of needs that is not being met. We talk about organizational involvement. That happens after the immediate needs of serving, making sure your child gets educated. So my thought is a pound of prevention here. Introduce coordinators and mentors that work with the families and fill that need of helping those families know how to educate their children. Once they have successfully educated their own children and they're collaborating strongly on that, I believe that we will have more people involved in the governance of the schools. But we are simply not connecting with families on the level that they need to be connected with, and that is making sure that we get their kids educated. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. I'll take a point of privilege here to crowbar in. Just what is an example of a thing that you think might work well there?
On that?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so here's my thought. How I'm going to be that watchdog on the Families and Education Levy. Okay, I want them to pay for mentors. Okay, we could have mentors K-12 in Seattle Public Schools and set ourselves apart from the nation. It would cost $10 million a year to have mentors that each have 25 students that they coordinate with the families on collaborating the education of children, because the deal is that this much education happens at school and this much happens at home. We're drilling kids for bubble tests right now in 2 subjects, which arguably are not even the things that are going to close the achievement gap. So I think the introducing mentors, forming very strong relationships, and again, doing this K-12 because we need a pound of prevention. This reactive intervention later is not working because the kids are already falling off the cliff.
So I hear you say mentors.
$10 million, that's 2% of the school budget,
Okay.
could be used. And I believe that the districts that are doing it only in the high schools are closing the dropout rate by 10%. I don't even think we'd have a dropout rate if we did this. So
Okay.
I'm looking for a systemic solution.
Thank you. Okay, mentors, K-12. I hear you. I'd like to go to Sherry and then Sharon. Okay, so Sherry, I would like to give you the opportunity to address what have you done with the state legislature to help fund and improve education?
Thank you. So I would start with, before I was on the board, I was the PTA leader, as I said previously, and as a PTA president, our unit always was engaged in the legislative activity, supported the legislative days where the PTA went down to Olympia. And I will tell you that as the PTSA president for the city of Seattle, I took the lead with organizing that in partnership with our leg chair. And we bus-loaded people down there to help turn out for the legislative days. Also emailed and telephone called legislators, making sure that I was advocating for additional resources in alignment with the PTA agenda. As a board member, certainly I have ongoing relationships with all of our state legislators from the 43rd, got my numbers inverted, the 46th and the 36th. I meet with them, I talk with them on the phone. I have participated in the day when we go down with Olympia and the board and the superintendent meet with whoever wants to show up. Really, it's for the Seattle delegation, but a lot of other people come. And we talk to them about our issues and help them understand the needs that we have and how they can help us. And so, again, critical votes, sending text messages while they're in session to help advocate for the positions that will most benefit Seattle students.
Okay, thank you. And Sharon, what would you like to say?
Well, I wanted to comment on the earlier question about working with communities. Because I think this is extremely important. I think we need to collaborate with school communities in making important decisions that impact our schools and children. And one of the main things is that the school board needs to actually listen to what the communities are saying, because the communities are frequently very vocal in their opinions on things like school closures, And they would be very vocal on things such as the sale of schools if they knew about it. So I think that it's urgently important that the school board works closely with site councils, building leadership teams, PTSAs, and that we should have many open forums where the school board listens to the community. Wow.
Thank you. All right, Peter.
So I'd like to talk about the legislative question. Before I was in the school board, I made many trips to Olympia to advocate for our Seattle schools. The reason I did that is because the previous school board, before I joined the school board, was not welcome in Olympia. And so the district lobbyists and...
I just need to note I heard a hiss there that someone objects to your characterization of the previous board not being welcome in Olympia. Continue.
Okay, I'm only speaking from truth, which is that the district's legislative representatives didn't feel comfortable bringing board members down to Olympia. That has definitely changed. I have a very good relationship, as does the rest of the present school board, with our legislative delegation, witnessed the endorsements from them. While I was on the board, I've been the district legislative representative. I've made a number of trips, and we have results. The state allowed us to lift our levy lid. As a result, we have a supplemental levy which passed and has $48 million more for our public schools in Seattle.
How do you feel about the fact that that money was spent differently than the goal had been for it to be spent?
The goal was to fund the new teacher contract, which happened. The only portion which is different from what was intended was that $1.9 million was needed to, I believe it was 1.9, was needed to replace the monies that the state reduced for our teachers, so therefore we had to backfill what happened from the state. What was proposed, which was on the ballot, was to fund the new teacher contract, and that happened.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Michelle?
I've wondered myself how I, as an individual citizen not sitting on the board, can affect K-12 funding at the state. And I called up a number of our state legislatures and asked, well, what do you want from the community? How can we help? And their answer was very curious to me, and I wanted to share it. They did not refer to our board members. They did not refer to the PTSA, which I thought is what they wanted to see parents there. They said, one, they want a lobbyist that's competent out of the school district down in Olympia, and we do have that. The second thing is they want parents, individual parents, to show up and lobby them for K-12 funds. And the question was, why don't parents come down and lobby us for funds outside of the PTSA structure? And the answer is because our parents are very tired in this community, working with our own school board and our own district. Individual parents don't feel that they necessarily have a voice down in Olympia because they don't feel like they necessarily have a voice here in the Seattle School District.
Thank you. Let's move on to a new topic area. The district is projecting 54,000 students by 2015, is that right? We are currently at about 48,000, and we have about 49,000 seats. So what is your strategy to plan for future capacity, and what ideas do you have to solve the current capacity issues? Harriet?
So capacity management is one of those things that I started really working on in earnest when, probably my first year on the board, when I was meeting with a group of parents in the Northeast, and we were combing through the data one afternoon and saw the cliff that was happening in the Northeast and in other parts of the city, West Seattle included in that. One of the things that we are doing is doing a better job at doing our projections and knowing what it is our base. How many seats do we actually have? What is our real capacity? Because there was a lot of conversation about that, and it wasn't clear. The second part is we know that we're going to need, for example, another middle school up in the Northeast. We know that we have identified all of the hot spots, and we are coming up with both 2-year, 3-year, and 5-year plans to mitigate those.
Thank you. Steve?
So I would just say a couple of things about West Seattle, particularly since this is mostly a West Seattle crowd. One is that we clearly have challenges both in the north part of West Seattle and in the southern part of West Seattle, particularly in the near term at the elementary school level. And the bridge to major funding is not until BEX 4, and that levy is not until February of 2013. The proposal that I'm most interested in, and so what the school district has proposed in the near term essentially is to move potentially up to 2 school communities into the Boren building, one from the north and one from the south, and then presumably do something in BEX 4. What I'm trying to work on now and hope we can get staff to support as well as board to support is a proposal whereby we move a northern community into Boren in the short term, that we remodel or redo the Genesee Hill property and ultimately get that open by 2015, which we'd have to start working on almost immediately in the south end to try and do the same thing with that south end community at E.C. Hughes, but after with a fall 2015, which gets the west side students, which are there through their minimum 5-year.
When you say Genesee Hill property, would that be the former Pathfinder?
Yes, that
Okay.
was the Pathfinder school.
All right.
Yeah.
So since we have a West Seattle crowd here, I also would like to follow up and ask, do you think it was wise to close Cooper?
So I think in retrospect, clearly it's hard to argue with the facts about the fact that we hit bottom in the enrollment about the time we were closing schools and it moved up. So it's clearly an uncomfortable situation for the board, and I regret that we had to do that, no question. And at the time, we felt like we did. The projections were down. Fall of 2008, we had major banking crisis and a huge set of pressures perceived on upcoming operating revenues and a mindset built in, as well as both outside and inside demographic studies suggesting that our downward trend was going to continue. So with the facts that I had at that particular moment, I felt like I made the best decision that I could, and obviously in retrospect, we've seen it take off in the other direction.
Thank you. I saw Kate's hand next, so Kate.
What you've seen is not planning. What you're seeing is not planning. That is reaction. And what happened with the school closures was letting schools, neglecting schools, letting enrollment fall, and then doing absolutely nothing to help those schools. And do you know which schools it is? The poor ones. They get neglected, they don't get maintained, enrollment goes down, the district does nothing and then says they have to close the school because the enrollment's down. That is not planning. What I will bring to the table when it comes to schools is actually, it's not a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, or even a 5-year plan. It's long-range planning. Seattle's going to be growing for the foreseeable future. And it doesn't mean you just pour kids from one school or one program into another. We need every region of the city to have strong schools and stability that they can count on. People need to know that their community schools are going to get stronger, not weaker. And if there ever comes a time when enrollment declines, and I don't see that in my lifetime, I think that we should give people a real good look at what that's going to look like in their community, not blindside them or have a political process where the rich schools get off the list.
Thank you. Marty?
Ditto to what Kate said. I appreciate your bringing out all that. And the other piece that was missing, particularly in the closure of Cooper School and in the current assessment of the situation, is truly integrated community involvement in the process. I firmly believe that if the whole West Seattle community had had the opportunity to participate in the conversation about the closure of Cooper School, that they never would have allowed the district to basically throw Cooper under the bus. And I think that as the ongoing conversation evolves, it needs to be redesigned so that people at the school level and district-wide have the opportunity to come together and reflect and have constructive, grassroots-based dialogue on what are the realistic solutions, long-term and short-term.
Thank you. Michelle?
I get tenacious about this because this is how I came into advocacy for my community on behalf of, and working with the school district, excuse me. So in the Northeast, when this board started 4 years ago, that community already knew that it was going to need another middle school. We're just now getting around to acknowledging that fact, and we're starting to make a plan that we might be able to do something in a few years. In West Seattle, when we passed the new student assignment plan, and I went to those meetings, I was amazed at the data that the community brought forward, clearly showing that geography plus placement of buildings plus current population meant that some amendments needed to be made to the overall plan. And it didn't take place at that time. And now we're just starting to talk about what we may be able to do, although we're constrained with funding. This is not visionary planning. And what happens is it falls on the back of our students and our families. Portables are not a plan, they're a Hail Mary, and we can do better.
Thank you. I'm gonna suggest something wacky. How would you feel about 30-second answers? Is that vile? Is that horrible? 30 seconds rather than a minute? Fun? Let's try it, and if you feel like it's not working, then just like shake your fist at me and we'll go back to a minute. We have so many great questions. I want to get to as many of them as we can, and I can already see we will not get to all of them in our remaining 30 minutes. So this is, let me just direct this to Harriam, Sherry, and Peter. Steve, you've addressed this already somewhat, I think, and then we'll move on to another subject area. So in 2009, the current board voted to close 5 schools. And at that time, all incumbents said we need to close schools, although Harriam, you voted against the closure plan. So what are your thoughts on it now? We'll try 45, how's that? Harriam.
Well, I guess, you know, the board did vote in favor of the closure. I did not. There were several reasons for that. One is, having visited African American Academy, having spent time with the Cooper community, and looking at the data, I did not think it was the prudent thing to do. It was wrong to my viewpoint in terms of what I knew at the time. So that's why I voted against it.
I think that was a good answer.
And in 30 seconds?
That was excellent. Let's try it, Sherry. Or, I'm sorry, Peter.
Okay, I'll try 30 seconds. First of all, for 3 of the schools, they were not closures, but rather repurposing. Queen Anne, Jane Addams, and then the Van Asselt building, which was African American Academy. We took under-enrolled schools and were ones such as Queen Anne, which had a different purpose, and specifically to provide more capacity, repurpose those schools. Secondly, this happened at the beginning of the recession. Nobody knew that this recession was going to be as long and deep as it was, and was done with outside and inside demographic projections, which showed that the decrease would continue. That has not happened. I think it's partly due to the student assignment plan. We need to move forward, and I'm confident that we will be able to provide the spaces we need for all of our kids.
Radical. Sherry?
So, at the time, based on the information that I had, and I believed I was making a choice between empty seats in schools and teachers in the classrooms. And my best conscience at that point said that I needed to opt for teachers in classrooms over empty seats in buildings. I think absolutely, as Peter identified, conditions have changed, the economy went a different direction, the new student assignment plan has absolutely increased our enrollment, families' mortgages are underwater, and I think Steve said it exactly right, given where we are today, obviously the answer is different than what we thought it was going to be.
Thank you. And is that 30 seconds feeling okay? Is that feeling all right? It's bordering 45. Hey, it's good. It's cool. All right.
We'll do it 15 seconds and 30 seconds, and then try to wrap it up by 45.
Okay, we'll keep trying that. All right. Maybe that'll give us like 1 or 2 more questions. All right. So, given the lack of money for staff aides for the board, how well do you think you can vet? So there's been discussion of trying to have more staff for you guys on the board, right? So how well do you think you can vet information given to you by district staffers? Kate.
The problem, what we've been seeing with the school board is that they don't do their homework and ask the staff the questions they need to ask them. And you can't make a school board director research issues. If they're going to be a school board director, I expect, and I know I will because I already do, my homework and my research. I've been doing it for years, and I'm going to ask those questions, and that's what it takes because the staff are bringing ideas that don't work, and the school board is rubber stamping them. So it's the questions you ask as a school board director that's going to change the directions that the school goes.
Thank you. Any other challengers or incumbents want to address that? Sherry?
So I categorically reject that charge. The fact of the matter is board members spend 30 hours a week working, doing research, reading our email, prepping for meetings. The work sessions leading up to a decision that goes in front of the board we've had a fair bit of investment made. Many of the items have gone through committee. So I just don't agree with the belief that these are rubber stamped decisions. We've worked them very hard and we've put a significant amount of time into them.
Thank you. Steve?
I guess I would also add, I mean, on purpose, I have chosen not to add staff in the board office because I believe at this moment in time we need the resources to flow as much as possible to classrooms. We have resources available to us through the Council of Great City Schools. Harriam has been an officer with CUBE, Council of Urban Boards of Education as part of the NSBA. So, and we have now a director of the board office who is an accomplished researcher in her own right, as well as a practicing lawyer. So we have advice and counsel. We can get the questions answered. Some of what you hear sometimes is disagreement with our conclusions, not necessarily about the research.
Marty?
The other thing I would like to add is that out there in the community is a tremendous amount of expertise, and I strongly believe in consulting with community members about what they have gleaned, because there are people out there who are reading all the same things that the board members are supposed to be reading.
Thank you. Peter?
This goes back to an earlier question about what do I plan to engage PTAs and other groups. I have. I am out several evenings a week talking with PTAs, visiting with community groups. I've been a PTA officer, and I've also visited with many groups who do not have PTAs. For example, I've been to, I remember, at least 2 meetings where parents had translators at Van Asselt and at Northgate, because those are community groups and families that don't necessarily send emails. I send an electronic newsletter, and I've brought Powerful Schools to Northgate. So I am out there, I'm engaged with the community, and will continue to do so if reelected.
Oh, okay, thank you. And let me just do a quick lightning with the incumbents. So do you, and you can just use your yes/no cards, do you feel like you now have adequate resources to vet information that comes to you from district staff?
Hello. I see some onion faces, so Sherry, what would you like to say about that?
Well, I would just say that more staff is always better, but understand that the trade-off is that the resources come out of the classrooms of our students. So we have added an internal auditor and a director of internal audit. There'll be 2 internal auditors. Those are people that will do oversight work on our behalf. We have 2 public advisors that we've added that will help us with overseeing the financial aspect of the district and are there also to read the materials and answer questions. We're in a better position than we were before, and Steve mentioned the board staff changes. So it's radically improved. More is always better, sure. I would love to have more, but I don't want to take more resources out of our classroom in this economic times.
I hear you, thank you. All right, Sharon, and then I'm going to move on to another topic.
Yeah, Bainbridge Island School District has an advisory, a citizens advisory committee that has 25 people on it from the community, and they oversee the budget process of the district and the school board. And I think that if we had a group like that in Seattle Public Schools, it would go a long way to increasing transparency and to improving the quality of the decisions that are being made. I also would like to see documentation made very easily available to the public. Any kind of documentation that the public has legal access to, it should be easy for them to access.
Thank you. All right, the board has recently approved, or I shouldn't say recently, the board has approved Teach for America, which allows recent college graduates to teach in our classrooms. And if you're elected, would you support continuing this policy? Why or why not? And I see Kate's holding up her card, so would you like to say why not?
I certainly would like to say why not. We actually need to raise the standards on the teachers that we have in the district, not lower them. We need it. As a person who's Mexican by marriage, I'm actually completely insulted with the idea that we would put the least prepared teachers in the classrooms with the students who need the most help. There's no shortage of teachers in Seattle. There's like 200 of them applying for each job. I just think that it's these people that parachute in with ideas from other cities don't get Seattle, and they bring ideas that don't work here, and I'm very, very disappointed by the TFA initiative here.
So if I could hear from one person who would like to continue it, I'd be happy to, otherwise we can move on. Steve?
I'm happy to continue it. I've supported TFA from the get-go here in Seattle, and my reasons have been basically two. That I want to empower our principals we are holding accountable for improving school outcomes in their communities. If they and their site-based hiring teams believe that a TFA candidate is the best candidate for one of their teaching positions, I want them to have the empowerment to make that hiring decision. I also think TFA nationally has done a better job recruiting candidates of color to the profession than Seattle Public Schools has, and I think it would benefit us if we were to have the same experience here.
Thank you. Why do Seattle Public Schools see such an alarming achievement gap between North and South Seattle, and what's the first thing you would do to fix it? Let me see, we recently heard from Kate, so let's hear from Harriet.
Well, so I guess you could say, what is the fundamental reason for the achievement gap? I don't use the word achievement gap, by the way, because I believe that makes it seem like it's the kid's fault, and it's not. I talk about the opportunity gap, because that's the right word to use. The students in the South End typically, the word typically, you have to be careful, do not have the access to the same opportunities. It's a matter of poverty. It's a matter of the fact that we have a divided city. If you happen to live up north, you have a little bit more money than you do when you're living down south.
In 10 seconds, fix it. Sorry, I'm giving you an extra 10 seconds. If there's anything you'd like to say about anything you would like to do to fix the opportunity gap.
I would say, number one, as a former kindergarten teacher, universal preschool. That stops the gap before it becomes.
Thank you. Michelle?
That's lovely, but that I agree, but that's not within the purview of Seattle Public Schools. So what can we do? One is, and I feel very strongly about this, directing funds in a manner that we can understand towards K-3 reading on grade level, so that kids aren't coming out of grade 3 without being able to read to learn. And then getting as close as we can to one-to-one interventions with our struggling students. Neither of those tactics, I don't see the plan within our current school district right now, and I'd like to see much more focus on both of those.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, I think there are a few really important things. We have an achievement gap way above preschool, kindergarten, grade 3. We need really effective remediation. We cannot be moving students along who are failing. We must remediate students who are failing. We must replace our failing curriculum with effective, clear, explicit curriculum that teachers can use to teach all students, including English language learners and students with special needs. We also must be sure that funding intended for Title I students gets to Title I students, and that's not happening now. If a school has less than 55% Title I students, they don't get any of their Title I funds. So those kids are not being served.
All right, Peter, and then we'll move on to another question.
That last statement is simply incorrect. students in Title I schools get the money, some portion of that is withheld initially downtown so that it can be redirected back to those same Title I students. And that is because if we just spend the money the same way that we're spending it last year, we'll get the same results. To me, the key to closing the achievement gap is looking at those successes and replicating them. Those successes we're seeing at Mercer, for example, Denny, and Maple would be another example. We need to continue to have money follow the students, especially those most in need, low-income students and English language learning students.
Thank you. And I see both Kate and Sherry would like to say something. So how about try to make it 20 seconds? Go.
I got to say that prepping kids in 2 subjects with bubble tests and prepping them for bubble tests and prepping them for bubble tests is not going to close the achievement gap. It's actually more oppression. Okay? What these kids are missing is not prep for bubble tests. What I would say is the free solution for doing this, because more money is not on the way, and things are actually going to get a lot worse. What we need to be doing is sharing the play card with families on who's doing what. Because to make believe that you can come to school with a conversation gap, with an experience gap, with an enrichment gap, with a literacy gap, with medical gaps, and to think that they're going to solve it at school is completely irrational. So I say, let's do it for free. Let's share the play card on how to get our kids ready. And let's try and get more kids prepared for kindergarten at home.
Okay, and so I'm going to just draw this out and belabor the whole thing. What do you mean by share the play card?
I have a magazine called theseattlejournal.com. I have a bunch of articles written by other people on there on what the achievement gap is and how we can actually go after it. The play card is that, and again I'm going to refer to my Mexican side, the kids at home are coming to school having not been involved in enough conversations at home, having not seen role models doing the things that some other kids get to enjoy watching at home. We've got TV that's 10 hours a day versus 2 hours a day. We've got all these things that add up to the achievement gap. And when I started sharing that with the Mexican side of my family, saying, here's what homework time looks like. Here's when the TV goes off all week. Your kids need to be watching you doing things that you want them to be doing. You need to be taking your kids out and getting experience in doing that. My relatives sucked it up. Okay. And they're doing very well with it. So I think we can't keep these secrets about how families can help their kids. And convincing them that we're going to just give them more hours of bubble test prep is actually hurting them and hurting the other students in the classroom that actually came to school prepared.
Okay, thank you. So, Sherry, I saw you had something to say, so please.
It's not 10 seconds.
No, it's not, so you won't be held to that either.
All right. I think that it's worth mentioning what we are doing. We, in the last couple of years, the Seattle Public Schools has implemented school reports. The school reports are targeted to increase transparency around every individual school, what the academic outcomes are, the school climate, and a number of other measures. In partnership with the school reports, schools were also segmented, levels 1 through 5, and identified to those levels based on whether the students were making a year's worth of academic gain or whether they were not. And so schools that were not making those gains are down in the level 1 and level 2 arena. So segmentation is the second piece of it. The third piece of it is the performance management dollars, and that's what Peter was talking about a bit ago. Money that was held back and did not pushed out to every school, Title I money, and that money was channeled to the level 1 and level 2 schools in partnership with the principal and the ed director and the teachers in the school. They make decisions about how best to use those Title I dollars to improve academic outcomes in that school. So that is specifically what we are doing to try to close the achievement gap and using many of the high leverage strategies that we're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Should all students who qualify for an advanced learning program, we heard a little bit from you on this in the lightning round, should they be guaranteed a seat in the program, and how do you do that? All right, and we just heard from Kate and Sherry, so I want to open it up to some other folks if you got something to say. Marty, I think I see you reaching for it, right?
So the last time I checked, APP was funded at the same level as the regular classrooms. And that, as my recollection, I haven't checked recently. That's my recollection. So it's not a matter of money. It's a matter of how you strategize to place the programs. And again, I'm sorry I keep coming back to the community, but if we bring the community into the conversation, we can come up with strategies that will fit the different areas. There are ways to deploy programs like APP and Spectrum. We need to strengthen Spectrum, but there are ways to deploy them more broadly and with more equity than they now are being deployed.
Okay, Steve.
So I think this is an example of where we've made a difference in West Seattle. We have added 2 Spectrum programs, one at this site, Madison Middle School, and another one down at Arbor Heights. It used to be that we had a functioning program at Lafayette and really too small to function effectively program at West Seattle Elementary. So we've made a difference in this. Some of these conversations with staffs are not always comfortable because not all of our staffs believe in this, but if there's community demand for it and the kids qualify per our criteria, we need to make sure that we've provided slots for them and have to have those hard conversations.
Thank you, Michelle.
This is a place where our school board and administration should be providing more guidance than it has, and we are overdue by a couple of years now on guiding principles for what our advanced learning curriculum should look like. So there are 3 parts. There are ALO, Spectrum, and APP. ALO and Spectrum is very poorly defined for our district. We need to make a decision on whether, especially Spectrum, is going to be self-contained, if the services are going to be delivered in the classroom, or if we're going to let schools decide. Until we decide what that is, how can we decide on how to place these programs? Because then we get down into capacity issues with buildings that have a finite number of spaces. So we need to start with our definition, and then we need to move into the tactics around rolling that out to schools in every section of our community.
Thank you. Sharon?
Well, I would just like to answer the yes-no part of the question. Yes, I think that all students who qualify for an ALO program should be guaranteed a seat. I think it's extremely important that we make that available to all students. We do need to decide exactly what ALO and Spectrum are and how they need to be structured and organized, but every student should have access to that.
Thank you. Kate?
One thing I wanted to draw your attention to is that we, for the most part, insist that the kids be duly gifted in math and language arts for advanced learning opportunities, which is completely irrational. Kids that are strong in science and math often are not strong in language arts. And so I want a kid that comes, that's a math genius, to shoot to the head of the class. I want them to get the challenges they need. My kids were dumped into general ed classrooms and got no challenge at all. I think we could do a much better job of differentiating ability grouping to make sure that we have kids with the right challenge that they need.
Thank you. All right. Oh, Peter, and then I'm ready to move on if you are.
30 seconds. So I agree that we want to expand opportunities for advanced learning, and that's happened in the last 4 years. More can and should be done. But I also want to focus on those students who are not in those courses. I believe that they can and should have more rigor, especially in our secondary schools, especially high school. Students tell us that they can handle more, they need to be challenged, that'll keep them more engaged. We are on an upward trajectory with the alignment of the curriculum, and I'm pleased that will continue.
All right, thank you. I just want to point out we have 9 minutes, oh, 7, fine. So we're going to bag closing statements. I hope that you weren't counting on that. So, all right. Okay, what changes should be made to the transportation program? Buses, changes, anyone? Harry?
Well, I think the transportation system has been evolving, at least since I've been on the school board. It's constantly evolving. We are looking, obviously we have the pressure of trying to reduce the cost. It's a very large chunk of money. But I think one of the things we need to look at is more aggressive use of our public transportation system, working more collaboratively with Metro. I think we also need to use our community stop, the model. That might be a way that we'll be able to get more savings and better and more efficient transportation out of the system.
Thank you. Sherry?
So I'd agree with the things that we just heard Harry outline. The thing that I would add is we really need to look at swapping our bell times so that the younger students start earlier and the older students start later. And I know when we had some dialogue about that initially 2 years ago, there was some concern on the part of parents of elementary students, but we really need to take a good hard look at it and figure out how we can make that happen, because the research supports doing exactly that, and I think it's an opportunity that we need to take advantage of.
All right, let's do a one-sentence answer for whoever wants to jump in, or three-word answer, however short you can do it. What is your new idea for a budget cut? One new idea.
Suspend the map testing.
Thank you. New idea? Sure.
Break the, or get out of the NTN contract on the STEM program in Cleveland and develop the program internally and create more STEMs throughout our district, internally.
Thank you. New budget cut idea? Okay, come
Suspend
on
the
now.
strategic plan.
Okay, let's give Michelle a chance to.
Personal service contracts review and minimize.
Okay, I'm going to give you a few more seconds there, just for anyone who doesn't know what that means. What does that mean, suspend personal service contracts and minimize, or review them and minimize?
So there are guidelines about what does and doesn't need to go through the board for financial approval, and then there's this whole other area of personal service contracts where we're not necessarily working with our existing labor force, but we have a need for a specific work or a part-time worker, and those contracts are often given, I call them the slush fund. They go to Friends of Friends downtown far too often, and they're often a no-bid contract, so we don't know that we're getting the best value for our money, and that's a place where we can save $1 million.
Okay, thank you. Sherry?
So you'll hear a lot of good ideas around how to reduce the budget. The fact of the matter is, we are to a place where we really have to make structural change to our cost structure and how we deliver education, not only in Seattle Public Schools, but education generally. So we need to look at structural changes, big structural changes. I think about things like shared services. So